Shall we start now?
Yeah.
All right, okay. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh. Selamat sejahtera and very good morning to all the participants that coming all the way throughout Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, UK and others. Yeah. This is our second Pereka Bandar Urban Talk webinar focusing on the pandemic COVID-19. Today, we're going to dive deeper on the post-pandemic city, urban design for better health and well-being. COVID-19 pandemic outbreak has affected the global severely. People becoming detached with the society and the built environment due to social distancing and movement restriction order in Malaysia started from March 18 and lasted in 4 phases. The community also faces challenges in their built environment in meeting the SOP by the Ministry of Health in all sectors such as education, governments and private sectors, tourism, businesses, transportation and other service provider. In order to get an in-depth understanding into this topic, we are honored to invite three distinguished panelists this morning. Before I introduce three of our panelists, I am Dr. Mastura. I'm going to moderate this session this morning. Okay, the first panelist, Associate Professor Dr. Amer Siddiq Nordin. Dr. Amer is an Associate Professor in Psychiatry, Director of the Center for Community Engagement and Sustainability, UMCARES, and the Chief Coordinator for University Malaya Center for Addiction Sciences, UMCAS in University Malaya. Dr. Amer is also the committee member of the National Mental Health Promotion Board, chaired by the Minister of Health. He is also the technical advisor to the Ministry of in Mental Health, Tobacco Control and Health Literacy, and consulted the WHO Organization Regional Office and UNICEF Malaysia for Mental Health. Our second panelist, Dr. Idlan Zakaria, she is the Chief Executive Officer of the Center, a think tank focusing on pragmatic centrist solution to socio-economic problems. She is currently on secondment from the University of Birmingham, where she teaches accounting and finance. At the center, she has focused her research on issues related to mental health and its impact on the socio-economic landscape, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. Last but not least, the third panelist is Dr. Shuhana Shamsuddin, adjunct professor. Dr. Shuhana, formerly a professor in urban design at UTM Kuala Lumpur, and currently serves as adjunct professor at the UTM Faculty of Technology and Informatic Razak. She is the first president of the Malaysian Urban Design Pereka Bandar, initiated earlier this year. She has more than 30 years experience of teaching and research in the field of urban design at UTM. She is also authoring books in urban design in Malaysia as a references. She was an expert group committee member to review the UN Habitat City Prosperity Index and also the lead consultant for KL Heritage Trail Master Plan by DBKL and territory area study of UNESCO World Heritage Sites of Georgetown and Malacca by the Department of National Heritage. All right. I will begin the first session based on panelists' expertise and views. Are you all the panelists are ready? Okay. All right. The question to all panelists, yeah, this is general question, but I hope that the panelists will actually give an insight based on their experience, expertise, and so on. Okay, what are the impact to the society's mental health and well-being during and post COVID-19? So I'm inviting Associate Professor Dr. Amer to start first. Yeah, normally ladies first, but now Dr. Amer is first from the psychiatric perspective. Okay, Dr. Amer.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Mastura, for the kind introductions, and also welcome everyone. I'm really apologizing if you're hearing this little ting-tong thing. I'm currently in clinic at the moment. I've overbooked myself. So we are currently in the new norm, and I'm trying to adopt that as well. So just to start, I think we want to stress at the very beginning that health includes both, includes physical health, mental health, and also social well-being. And we are very comfortable with the notion of physical health. We might not be as comfortable with mental health and social well-being. And I think in terms of the issue that we're going to be discussing today, it is the social well-being that is very much related to the environment out there. So the COVID-19 experience, and I've just recently read an article this morning in the US as well, has actually increased the stress, depression, anxiety levels of all populations. And we found similar results as well in Malaysia. So as a result of that, post-event or post-MCO, we've seen a number of cases come forward who probably would not be here if it wasn't because of this pandemic. And often the issues would be related to stress and anxiety. And of course, if these two are not treated, depression might lurk around the corner. So we've noticed that as well. Now, the second thing about the COVID-19, which is very interesting, particularly during the MCO period, is the isolation that people have struggled with during that particular period. And we're also noticing that the way that we design our places of stay, the way that we design or live, actually, if it wasn't very obvious before, becomes blatantly obvious during the MCO. And I think this is why this particular topic is really exciting. Now, there was a study that we did together with the center, but I think more importantly, one of the things that I found quite interesting is that the spaces that you live in or the size of the spaces really affect the way that your mental health at that period of time. I just came back from Kuantan recently, and I was looking at the spaces over there. From some of those people living in the rural areas, you've got really big land and a lot of greenery. And for those of us who live in the city, particularly who live in maybe apartments that have not been designed very well, you might live without any greenery and without any space. Now, it's not obvious during this particular period of time, but during the MCO, when everybody was locked in their environment that they were in, you would notice that a number of you might have struggled, particularly around the 1 month mark. And I think reflecting back on this, a lot of us suddenly developed green hands during this period of time. We've seen a lot about vertical gardens. We've heard a lot about people doing bonsais during this period of time, because I suspect that it's only natural, and of course the research has shown that having green spaces does improve mental well-being. And COVID actually pushed that particular issue to the fore, which I think is worth for us to discuss. So these are some of the issues that have happened during COVID-19 from a mental health perspective.
Okay. And other than that, Dr. Amer, based on your experience, how people react towards the change, and then how does the state of the mental health when they are in isolation, because that is actually on the positive side by sort of like having a green hands and creating garden, even though at a small pocket. But other than that, on the severe part or on the slightly negative part.
Well, definitely, as I mentioned just now, that the stress, anxiety, and depression levels have increased during this period of COVID. And it is very much related to that isolation. It is very much related to the social interaction, particularly if you live in communities where you're not able to connect with each other. COVID-19, as well as you know, is a very interesting situation where, as a result of it, the whole country suddenly went into a move and control order. Everything literally stopped overnight during that period of time. So the increase of stress during that particular period of time, for some people that are not able to adjust very well, had tipped the balance, whereby they were really struggling, particularly people who've never been exposed to mental health issues. We saw a number of them coming forward, particularly in the month after the MCO. For those of us who might be psychologically minded, or for our patients who are under treatment, who are very much in tune with their mental health and mental illnesses, they came a little bit later when there didn't seem to be an end in sight. But a lot of us that didn't have issues with mental health were actually seen much earlier. And this is because that sudden change that happened created a huge amount of stress among many people. But if you think about yourself during that period of time, you were working at home. I don't consider it working from home because we're all forced to work at home without the equipment that we might need to work. We had family members who were not going to school and not working. They were all jam packed in our living arrangements. And some of our places were not big enough to cater for this number of people at any one time. If you remember, it happened on the 18th of March. 16th of March was a holiday. Some of you, dah balik kampung, have actually gone back to your village. And some of you were stuck there without the ability to come back. So these kind of changes that are drastic and uncertain, because initially it was 2 weeks and then it became 4 weeks, and then before you know it, it was 3 months. Created a lot of inconvenience and difficulties for a lot of people. And let's not even talk about the economic impact as a result of people not being able to work, particularly those who were, like I said, maybe on holiday. I just had a patient just now who apparently was stuck in an island during that period of time and had to pay for the hotel room during that whole COVID period because that person couldn't come back to the mainland. So yeah, of course it looks idyllic, but you still have to pay. So these kind of sudden changes creates a lot of stress to individuals, which of course will eventually lead to emotional instability for some of us that might have risks.
You mentioned about the spaces just now, where spaces where they live is actually playing an important role. Is there any some kind of in your data based on your research that where they live is also affected to their mental health?
Yes, in our in the study that we did together with the center, and I think Idlan can correct me if I'm wrong, the spaces were very much related to the mental health severity during that period of time. So the smaller your arrangements, definitely the more difficulties you're having coping. The number of people within that household, depending on the space, also contributed towards the mental health status at that point of time. So these were two that we noticed. Internationally, it was reported that depending on whether you had the ability to see green areas also played a part, whether you were locked in areas where there was really no connection with other people also played a part. So, and the ones I can think that might be related to us will be, for example, our PPR flats, which are little almost like pigeonhole type of apartments, which are very small. And if you were following strict SOP during the MCO period, you're literally in your little hole without much connection outside. And of course, we've seen about the case in Sabah, where there was connectivity issues. So not only are you physically distant, but you're also socially distant. And of course, we kept on talking about it on the health level that physical distancing doesn't mean that you don't interact with each other, because we know that social connections is very much required. But again, some of us might have had some of those limitations because of the area that we were living in.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amer. We have got 1 more minute. Yeah, perhaps you may want to share with us, other than the impact on the how do I say? We have talked about the spaces of living, and the people change. Do they actually change or transform themselves into something that is they don't expect to be, like in terms of negative side, like
Yeah. So
becoming
I think
weird or something, behavior or something?
no, I think what we've noticed is that for those of us who have risks of developing anxiety disorders, the most common mental illness that have come forward over the last at least 3 really opened up after the COVID has been anxiety. And we know that there are a number of people who are worried about contracting this illness. And of course, there are others who were struggling financially, who are also worried that another MCO would also cause them to be in more financial difficulties. So again, that worry, especially when there is no end in sight. Yeah, we are hopeful that there will be a vaccine, but as you know, that the data, the duration might not be as quickly as we'd like it to be. So these kind of uncertainties for some people can create a lot of insecurities for them, which eventually will lead to levels of difficulties in maintaining a composed emotional state. And it is this kind of changes that we're seeing starting to attribute. So as much as we would like to reassure people that things are going to go back to normal, and we do know that eventually it will be, we just don't know when that time frame will be. So people need to prepare themselves for the worst, in a sense, and hope for the best, which I think we'll share later about what we can do in order to maintain some level of composure so that your mental well-being is very much protected during this period of time, which I foresee in the near future or in the future will not be anything abnormal. We might be, there are lots of information going out there that we might be in a situation where in the future there might be things like this or something different, where changes will suddenly happen quite quickly, which we have to adapt. So the quicker that we open to this idea, the more likely that we're able to adjust better.
Okay, thank you. Wow, it sounds scary, but then I hope that we could stay positive. Okay, I'm going to extend this discussion to Dr. Idlan to give her insight from the economic perspective. Dr. Idlan, can you please unmute? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mastura. Thank you, Pretty Banda, for having me this Saturday to talk a little bit about this very important issue. I think maybe first I would like to talk a little bit about the study that Dr. Amer mentioned, the study that the center worked on together with Dr. Amer actually as one of our psychiatric experts on the study. So we conducted a study on the impact of the MCO on mental well-being, mental health, focusing on two particular aspects. First, where people lived during the MCO, and second, what their financial situation was during the MCO. So we sort of tried to capture kind of the spirit of the moment during the MCO and what people felt. So this study, what we really wanted to know was how the housing situation, which was suddenly changed almost overnight for a lot of people, and also their financial situation, which also changed significantly, affected their overall mental well-being. So we conducted this study in April. So this is about 3-4 weeks within the MCO. So the novelty, for example, of being able to work from home and having a 15-second commute to your office, so to speak, started to wear off, and people were getting very antsy. People were starting to realize that there was a lot of uncertainty. So this is when the point in time when we conducted the study, and it gave us an interesting snapshot of what people were feeling during that particular MCO period. So what we did, okay, so we sent out a questionnaire. The questionnaire we had to do via snowball sampling because we couldn't go out and collect information because obviously everybody had to stay at home. So of course, academically, the impact of that was that we couldn't quite get a certified sample, but we did manage to get over 1,000 respondents to this. And if you're familiar with statistics, you will appreciate the fact that this is quite a significant number already for us to derive inferences from. And what we did in this questionnaire was we asked them to answer what they felt like using a standardized questionnaire that is used in psychiatry and psychology called the DAS-21 questionnaire. And Dr. Amer advised us on this tool. And this is a standard tool that we didn't create this tool. This tool has been created by academics and has been used. It's a tested tool. And this particular tool basically measured people's feelings of anxiety, feelings of stress, and feelings of dimension. And it could range from normal levels of stress, anxiety, and depression to extremely severe levels. And together with that, we asked them to answer questions related to where they live, okay, and also what their financial situation was during that period. And our study found some really quite interesting insights. Yeah? First of all, during that period, almost half of our respondents reported experiencing at least mild levels of anxiety, depression, and stress. About 30% actually started to experience severe um, negative emotions, and about 15% experienced extremely severe negative emotions during this period. We found that those who were living in low-cost housing, which is PPR and also landed low-cost housing, had experienced more severe negative emotions, the stress, anxiety, and depression. This is not to say that the people who were living in bungalows were actually happy during this period. They also experienced, varying levels, but it was more pronounced amongst those who were living in low-cost housing. And this relates back to what Dr. Amer was saying about this being something that you're living in pigeonholes. There's not a lot of space for you to maneuver around. Second, we found that where there were levels of high crowding, right, people who were living in houses, a lot of people, that contributed a lot to their negative emotions. But also people who were living alone, so people who were isolated, right? So there wasn't really a particular figure where there's not really a sweet spot where, if you live with 3 people, you're fine. If you're living with 5 people, not so fine. If you live alone, not so fine. There was different kinds of emotions. So people, when they were crowding, they were reacting to different things. So for example, people who were living with intergenerational families. So you had your grandfather, your parents, and your children in that. They were a little bit more, experiencing a little bit more negative emotions based on their responses to our study. But also people who were living alone because they were isolated from social contact during that point. And we also found that people who had some personal space within their dwellings, yeah. So this is people who maybe they have their own bedroom or they might have their own office. They were coping a little bit better. They were experiencing less levels of negative emotions. People who didn't have as much personal space struggled a bit more, or reported at least a bit more negative emotions. From the financial aspect, unsurprisingly, people who suffered decreases in income or people who are unemployed were were exhibiting very, very high signs of stress, anxiety, and depression. For those who were in employment, the people who had to go on unpaid leave. So there were a couple of sectors which were severely affected by the MCO, for example, tourism. And a lot of them, in the first couple of weeks, they were put on unpaid leave or half pay. They were very, very, they responded with high levels of stress, anxiety, and depression. I think, and I'm speculating here because we didn't go down and speak to them. We couldn't interview them. There was a lot of uncertainty, and I think uncertainty there also created a little bit of negative emotions. We also asked them what they were most concerned about in terms of their financial situation after the MCO, what they were really worried about. And we found there were two kind of very popular responses here. First, they were very, very worried about not being able to support their dependents after the MCO. And second, they were very worried about not being able to repay their loans, their mortgages after the MCO. And this is again linked back to their unemployment or low or reduced ability to generate income. Now, if we are today, we're talking about the 26th of September, I think a lot of people are very aware of the fact that on the 30th of September, the blanket moratorium is ending. So this fear of people not being able to pay or repay their loans is starting to become a lot more concrete, and this is something that will affect their mental health, I think. Which brings me to my second point, which is the economic impact of mental health during COVID-19. A clear link, right, between economics can be seen in a study that an organization called Relate did. In 2018, they found that when employees suffered mental health issues, it actually cost the employers 14 billion ringgit in terms of lost productivity. Yeah? So what are the implications of this? Well, when you have worries, okay, that could be financial situation worries or housing situation worries that may link to mental health, there is actually then a knock-on effect on the productivity, which could then have a knock-on effect on the economy. Okay, that's assuming you still have a job. If you don't have a job, then this has a massive economic impact on the country in general anyway. And I'm not going to talk too much about the unemployment levels because we already see this everywhere. The statistics are very, 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 very alarming. So, for example, if you are thrown into poverty as a result of the MCO, maybe you had a job, you were probably in the middling M40 category, you lost your job, you are not now able to support your dependents, you're not able to repay your loans, you might be thrown into this area of, or you might be thrown into the class of poverty without actually much heads up on your part. So this also would increase some levels of, I think, mental health. I mean, Amer is a psychiatric expert. He could probably link that a little bit better. So how does all of this link with urban design, right? So for me, I see urban design to be part of the solution. Okay, so for example, right, if cities are built to deal with or to help manage mental health issues better, we can use the design of the city's buildings, dwellings, and so on to alleviate some of the mental health problems that we are seeing. Because to me, this is an integrated issue. And because the issue is integrated, there's a link between where we live, how we live, to the economy, to our mental health. The solution also needs to come with an integrated perspective. Okay? For me, at the moment, the economic situation is quite bad. And this will have a knock-on effect on mental health issues, partly driven by unemployment or people who are in financial difficulties. And if we do not have cities or buildings or parks that help people manage their mental health better, then I think that we are heading into a situation where there is a problem, because getting mental health support is not just about going to the psychiatrist. It's also about how we live and the situation and the surroundings that are around us on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, Dr. Amer.
I fully agree with you, Idlan. In fact, what you mentioned just was spot on. First of all, we know that the risk of poverty definitely plays a part in mental health. The more impoverished you are, the more likely you're going to be dealing with mental health issues because of a number of factors. The living arrangement might not be conducive. There might be trauma that happens over there. Of course, nutrition plays a part in the brain's development at early childhood, and that also might be implicated. And of course, if the area or the place that you're living in doesn't have that kind of social network or connections because of the design of the place, definitely people will be at greater risk of developing mental health issues because of that. I mean, we talk about, for example, overcrowding in housing areas, for example, which increases many types of risks. So I fully agree with you. You're right also in terms of the economic impact that we are really seeing. I know you are saying that we didn't interview them, but we have, people like me have the opportunity to actually talk to people who are struggling with mental health issues, and the number one factor at this point of time appears to be, as you rightly mentioned, the worry that they might not have employment, or the fact that they have lost employment and are needing now to deal with the consequences of that, particularly if you've got a breadwinner. And again, this has been seen internationally, and this is where I think we've been calling for action a little bit earlier because, as you rightly mentioned, 1st of October is just around the corner. And we really need to, we need to be prepared for people that are struggling, that will be coming forward looking for help.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, by this is the last month that the moratorium has been deducted, and moving on, October is already they have got another kind of strategy. Perhaps later after this, Dr. Idlan may want to elaborate on that. Okay, moving on to Dr. Shuhana, adjunct professor, could you please elaborate on the urban design point of view? How do we, what are the impacts? Do people tend to be so confused about the usage of the urban spaces? Dr. Shuhana?
Okay. Thank you, Mastura. um, as far as urban design is concerned, to me, this pandemic is actually a blessing in disguise. It is a time for us to reflect at the moment. What kind of environment, what kind of cities have we been giving to the people? So much so that the pandemic actually could make the quality of life of the people more severe than before. Um, what From my experience and the research that I've done so far, the one of the major problem in our country is the lack of concern for urban design. We have been building, we have given the wrong priorities in the way we build our cities. Our cities are more car centric rather than people centric. We are so very obsessed with facilitating movement of traffic and vehicles, providing parking facilities as close as possible to the place of work, and we tend to neglect the needs, the basic needs of the people in terms of the need for leisure and recreation, and all these needs of access to the green and open spaces, which is very crucial during the MCO. Had we built our cities to be people centric, to actually accommodate the needs of these people in that respect, probably the effect the impact to the wealth and the well-being will not be as bad as this. Before I elaborate on this issue, I would like to highlight that in urban design, most of our theories and principles actually relate to the environmental psychology, where the concern in urban design is actually of the relationship between people and the environment, and the impact of the environment to the people. And this relationship is actually being developed through the process of perception and cognition. When people perceive the environment, they develop it influence the cognition, uh, and this in fact develops some kind of attitude towards the environment. And people during the process of perception and cognition, they have also do some kind of evaluation of the environment, and this process actually will end up to influence, to develop a certain attitude towards the environment, and in the end the behavior response will be the outcome of this whole process. Now the behavior of people in the environment actually can change the environment, and it's actually a subconscious thing. It's a latent manifestation. You cannot pretend in your behavior. You can pretend by when you in voicing your opinion, but you cannot pretend in the way you behave, because it is something that it will come naturally. If you don't like certain environment, your behavior will actually reflect in it, and this will actually have some influence in changing the environment, and the process of the environment affecting the perception will actually continue in a cyclic manner. And that's why in urban design we are very concerned about this. We want to make sure that the environment is actually promoting positive behavior rather than negative behavior, and we want to people to have a positive attitude towards the environment through their perception. I give you an example. If we Another aspect of environmental psychology is what we call environmental numbness. When you are providing a mediocre environment to the people, mediocre in the sense that the city lacks identity, it lacks character, it's not attractive, it doesn't attract you to stay longer than when you need it. People becomes numb to that kind of environment. And when people are numb to the environment, they do not have a concern or have sense of pride or sense of belonging towards the environment, and this leads to them not caring if anything's being done negatively. For example, why are we? It's already 2020. We are still a society that can tolerate dirtiness. Cluttered environment. We can sit at the warung eating, and yet we can see the drains are cluttered, there's so much rubbish being shot, and we can still, eat as if nothing's happened. This is the outcome of environmental numbness. We are numb to that kind of situation. If we are not numb, we are going to demand a very clean and a healthy environment to live with. So this is a problem. Another example, if you perceive our environment to be unsafe, then our behavior will reflect on it. So we end up building a prison instead of a home. We spend so much money, building fences, gates, what else? CCTV, pay the gated, guarded. For what? Because we perceive the environment to be unsafe. Had we designed the environment to be safe, then this behavior will not end up, and we will not be wasting our money, on that aspect. So that's why I said urban design. This pandemic is very. Is the time is correct, because we need to have a quantum leap. We need to change our priority. We have been focusing too much in building cities with so many shopping malls, so many offices, so many hotels, which is also vacant. Some of the hotels there are so many unoccupied spaces. But how many places for leisure and recreation have been providing for the people in the city centre and also in our neighbourhoods? When we talk about urban design, we're not just talking about city centre. We are talking about also the places that we live, the neighbourhoods. Have we provided a safe neighbourhood? Have we provided a neighbourhood with identity and character that you want to take care of? Have you provided a neighbourhood where we can just walk, have easy access to open spaces and green areas, places for our children to play? Have we been providing all this? If we haven't, if we still have an environment, a city with very bad traffic congestion, if our cities lack character and identity, if our cities people are still not able to walk within the places of the city centre, then these are bad these are indicators of bad urban design or lack of urban design. So from the past research that I have done, we have all these indicators, but nothing much has been done in terms of priorities of giving quality to our environment. Because in urban design, we are concerned about how the environment can improve the quality of life to the people. And quality of life is very important because it has an influence on the well-being. When you have a good quality of life, your mental well-being will be, I think so, Dr. Amer, isn't it? Your mental well-being will be much better when you have a better quality of life. And urban design is the only if we approach designing our cities to accommodate what I've been mentioning, then we promote better environment. We will help to increase the well-being of the people. So I think what is needed now is because of this impact, then we have to reflect back. There are two impacts that I see is the existing cities. How can we accommodate the needs for all this access to the spaces, like the needs for interaction. Virtual interaction like this actually can solve some problem, but it's not the solution. As a human being, we have to meet face to face. And how can we do that, with these limitations of the pandemic? The COVID-19 may not go away next year. It may be here to stay forever. I hope so, not, but it can be a situation. So what do we do with it? We cannot be locked down all forever, So now we have to look back. How can we make full use of the? I think for Malaysia it will be difficult because all this while we have not been given enough emphasis to provide quality urban open spaces for the people, especially for those the low income group. But I think it is about time that the priorities should change in the way we provide the living environment of the people as well as the environment of the city centre. We have now got to make walking as the preferred option in the city centre. No more driving because the cars cannot drive anyway during the COVID-19. No point. Now that we have so many roads, huge roads in the city centre, but during this pandemic, those roads are now useless. It cannot now help us. But what is needed is the spaces for people to have access to recreation and so forth. So there should be a change now in terms of the way we design our city centre. We should build more streets instead of roads, because in urban design, streets are behavioural settings for people, whereas roads are the means to transport goods or people from one point to another. In Malaysia, we are focusing so much on building roads, not streets. We have very little focus on streets. I think even in KL, probably Jalan Tunku Draman is one of the streets that have changed its character. Rather than in the past, it was a road. Now it started to become like a street because the sidewalks are now wider. There are more trees, landscaping, and more seating benches are provided, because people don't go to the city centre just to do shopping. Sometimes people need to go to the city centre just for leisure and recreation. So I think we have a problem in terms of one of the problem in the way we design our city is our obsession to provide so many shopping malls. So much so that during the pandemic, these shopping malls, many of them have to be closed down because people are shopping online now. People cannot go out. And if you look now, this pandemic has shown us that what can so many shopping malls do to the quality of life of the people, as compared if you have cities where there is the proportion of the open spaces given to the people. Is more as compared to what we have in our country. So I think maybe after this we have to review back. We have to review back the way we build city. There should be now more priority given to giving places for recreation and outing. I would also like to emphasize that in the design of our urban neighborhood, in the past there is very little concern to providing secured safety in the way we design the housing environment. By right, in terms of environmental psychology theory, we should design the environment to group people into clusters, so that people have a small group in their urban neighborhood where they can have developed social interactions, where they can really become neighbors. If you're living in a terrace housing, sometimes you don't even have an opportunity to meet your neighbor, because from your house you can just drive out into the streets. You don't even know who your neighbors at the end of the road and so forth. If the layout of the housing is being designed as such that people are grouped into smaller clusters of housing, then you have your own cluster of people which you develop very strong neighborhood ties, and these are the people who can provide support during this lockdown period, where you can have you don't feel the need of social isolation. You don't feel being isolated because you are in an environment where you have your neighbors where you can actually meet by chance and so forth. If you look at in UK in US, many of the houses, they have this concept of meals court and these courtyards, housing through courtyards, because these are the where they provide spaces people can interact.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Shuhana. You are already like encroaching into a little bit of your strategy. Okay,
Okay, I can continue later on.
Yeah, perhaps you may want to add more about that. Okay, I move on to the second session because we have just like finished the first session. I have two interrelated questions to be discussed by the panelists in 8 minutes, yeah, each. All right. My question number one is, what are the preparations needed if the pandemic prolongs and the third wave is here? And subsequent to that, what is our role as an individual and as a community in coping with the pandemic and be more resilient? So perhaps Dr. Amer want to go first again?
Thank you very much. That's quite a challenging question, that one. I think moving forward, first of all, as I've shared before in other forums, we need to be prepared for the eventuality, as both Dr. Shuhana and Idlan have mentioned, regarding the possibility that this particular situation might stay. The quicker that we are at least in acceptance of this, the better. The second thing is actually to make sure that the information that we get is the correct information, so that the activities that we do in order to prevent us from getting this particular virus will also be part and parcel of the way that we actually live. One of the reasons why things were difficult is because there was a sudden change in the way that we actually lived before to what we are living at the moment. The quicker that we are able to adapt, the more likely that we are able to reduce some of the impact that will happen. Now, we know that change is a major stress, and therefore, one of the ways to mitigate stress and reduce the consequences of it is actually routinizing a number of our activities. Now, I know it might not be very easy to do, but when there are changes, the more routines that you have, the more control that you have of the environment that is consistently changing. And for many people, having that level of control allows us to actually manage our expectations of the environment, which is ever changing. This is a very good point that we're having right now, because things are changing, but if you have a routine and you stick to your routine, God willing, you'll be able to maintain some level of level-headedness in this. Now, we have noticed that as individuals, routine is important. In terms of maintaining mental health during this particular period and thereafter, the cheapest way to actually do it is to prevent from getting mental illness. And the first thing that you need to do is actually go back to basics. And this is where urban planning, back to what Dr. Shuhana was mentioning, is really important. Exercise is a very cheap yet difficult preventive strategy to maintain mental health. The spaces that we have might not be very conducive for it, and this is something that we need to think about. Now, the second one is going to be maintaining sleep, and again, the environment plays a big part in our ensuring that our sleep cycle is actually quite controlled. So these are two things that you can actually do as individuals to actually maintain some level of or prevent mental health issues. Of course, the third one that is often mentioned is going to be having some form of relaxation mechanism, or things like mindfulness, for example, which might be helpful. And again, you're going to be dependent on the environment that you are in. There are some places where you feel zen, some places that when you look at it, you feel so cluttered and claustrophobic that you don't want to do things. So again, I think these are some of the things. Now, how do we prevent or reduce some of the consequences of this pandemic for the community? That social interaction and connectiveness is actually very important. One of the findings that we noticed during this period of COVID was the rise in domestic abuse and also the rise of neglect among the elderly. Now, again, it might be, if you think about it, it could be that these individuals were not identified to us. It also could be that the way that we are living prevents the interaction that we should be having as a community to look out for each other, to ensure that people are protected even within their four walls. So if there's something that the community can do, definitely is going to be looking at these areas. Now, as I mentioned just now at the very beginning, one new skill that most of us have developed is actually having clean hands. So again, people that have the knowledge and skills can actually assist community by maybe building very small little sanctuaries, green sanctuaries. For example, in Malaysia, with our faculty of architecture, they're working with some of the PPR flats, looking at these vertical gardens to assist people to live in their lives a little bit, despite the condition that they're currently living. So these are just some activities I think we can all adopt in this particular period to probably hopefully reduce some of the consequences.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amer. You mentioned something related to National Plan on Mental Health. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I think the most important gist of it. So this is a strategy that has or will be coming out hopefully soon, which looks at the 5-year plan for mental health in the country. Now, of course, it's not been officially announced, but what I can say is that community mental health is a significant role, plays a big part, and we can see that already on the ground where there are community centers to hopefully assist in mental health care. Now, there are certain NGOs out there like the Malaysian Mental Health Association, which has created something called the Mind Hub. They've also got the Mental Illness and Support Association, MIASA, which have actually looked at creating something called Clubhouse. And these are areas, I think, or these are initiatives which really try to get the community to come together and do certain activities together to mitigate and reduce and prevent mental health issues moving forward. Now, the Ministry of Health has already 27, they call it Mentaris, which are community mental health centers out there, which again, so it's going to be, I think the gist is going to be looking at these areas apart from our issues. And I think for our discussion, I think these community mental health initiatives are really something that are important. You know, I'll give you an example. In Australia, for example, the oxygen, they call it oxygen, which is the early intervention for mental health care, is actually in the shopping mall. So people that might have issues when you're shopping, you might just drop by and get yourself screened, or you could actually learn something about mental health care in areas where traffic is very big. I think similarly what Dr. Shuhana has mentioned in Melbourne, for example, where this particular initiative is, people are always walking. There's very little either walking or cycling, not driving. And therefore, this foot traffic allows people to get the information and for others to actually be able to assist easily as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Amer. Dr. Idlan, would you like to answer the question? How to make sustain the economy? Yeah.
Right. So I think at the moment, right, in terms of what's kind of happening in terms of if we have a third wave, to make sure that the economy can still move, albeit maybe at a slightly slower pace. I think we've come to the point where we need to realize that we need to help people, individuals, as much as we help companies and jobs, right? So when we first had our first round of COVID, the first wave, there was a lot of effort in trying to help people keep their jobs so that they have money, right? And I think the government put in some form of wage subsidies and so on and so forth. But in the long term, I think this has to move a little bit towards helping people, because people are already losing their jobs. Jobs are gone, and therefore we need to make sure that people can actually still continue to survive. So for example, right, if we take the case of, let's say, Europe, in Europe, there was a lot of effort in trying to help with the wage subsidy. But as the COVID-19 pandemic prolongs itself, people are seeing that if you put more cash in the hand of people, like what they're doing in the US, what they started to do in the US, that is probably going to be more helpful in the long run. The good news is that we're already doing this to a certain extent in Malaysia. On Monday, I believe the Prime Minister announced yet another round of cash assistance. And that's a good thing on the one hand, but on the other hand, I would probably raise the issue of quantum here. Is it enough, the amounts that we are providing, and can it be sustained over the long term? These are quite important questions that we need to think about as a country. Personally, this is only on a personal basis, I want to see more universal assistance in terms of universal cash assistance, but that's a long-term thing, because there are issues of revenue that we need to think about. There are issues of funding these cash transfers that we need to think about. So at the kind of even at this level, if we could have targeted, which is what we're starting to do already in Malaysia, targeted assistance to those that need it the most, right? So we see this in the renewed moratorium, as Dr. Mastura mentioned earlier. We've got the moratorium on loans is ending at the end of this month, but that's the blanket moratorium. But banks are still, going forward or going ahead with targeted moratorium for those who need this assistance the most. Now, this cannot be something that is sustainable in the long run, because you can't keep delaying. A moratorium is nothing more than delaying. It's not writing off your debt. You still have to pay it, right? It's just that you're delaying the payment. But for as long as people do not have cash in their hands, they will not be able to pay. Whether it's today, next year, next 2 years, and so on and so forth. So again, I'm going back to the idea that we need to actually try and move away from just helping companies and jobs, and maybe move a lot more into helping individuals, especially on a targeted basis. Now, in terms of the role of what you can do as an individual and as a community in coping with the pandemic, I think it is very important for us to realize here that we are all frontliners in this respect, in the sense that it starts with us. It only needs one person, as we've seen in the case in Kedah, to kind of violate the requirements for it to create clusters that seems to affect everybody. So we need to continue to be sensible, and we need to continue to think about other people, because the impact of our actions, both financially, both from a community perspective, it's not just on us. Okay, it's actually the concept of community living here and social interactions as well. So individualistic countries have, this is where the more individualistic nations have failed, right? Because they don't see this as a community based. But in Asia, we are more community based. I think it's very important to make sure that we kind of adhere to the SOPs. We're being sensible, not just with our finances, but also in the way that we are conducting ourselves during this kind of slightly difficult time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Idlan. Dr. Shuhana, could you please perhaps further elaborate on the strategy just now? Yeah, and the rule.
How much time I think?
You got 8 minutes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
5 to 8 minutes.
Why I already encroach into the strategy, because to me the impact is already we can see already staring at our face, and what is more important now, how do we deal with the problem. And because all this while we have not been focusing so much on the urban design, and that's why our cities are not ready to face this impact. I can see there are about four things that is needed to be focused in the way we handle this problem from urban design perspective. One is the need for access to nature and green spaces, urban spaces, where at the moment, even without the pandemic, this has already been a problem, and the pandemic has actually blow it into a proportion that warrants our immediate attention. And then secondly is to make sure we have a walkable environment. We have to promote, we have to have an environment, the design of our city centres and neighbourhoods should make walking a priority or a preferred option, rather than walking is the least. Or sometimes people walk because as a form of exercise, whereas I think if you want to promote a very healthy society, walking is a natural choice. It's not that something that you do because you have to, but it is actually part and parcel of your way of life. And if you look at Japan, there are not many obese people around because they have to walk. It's difficult to drive in Japan. So when like just now Dr. Amer is saying, it is the best exercise, and it's the cheapest. Responding to Dr. Idlan's concern on the economic aspect, if environment is walkable, it's cheap. You don't even doesn't cost a lot, and you save money on not having to spend on medication because you're healthy and fit, and you have a very positive mind, because when you are healthy, your well-being is will also improve. So actually this is why this is the what I'm trying to stress, the impact of urban design to all this whole discussion. And how we can integrate the green environment into the design of our place is actually to give it a priority. We have to have a policy of people-centric environment rather than car-centric, that the way that we are having. So the priority now has to change. When you have a people-centric environment, now we must make sure that everybody have adequate access to this nature, and this will actually affect the way we design our housing environment, and especially for the low-income group. I think there shouldn't be this terminology of low cost housing anymore. It should be social housing. I think if in UK they don't call low cost housing. It's when you have a terminology social housing, then it's not about the low income. It's about then because it's our social responsibility to give people who have who are unfortunate enough, to have a very low income, to have a decent kind of quality environment and quality of life. So one of the way to do this actually in the example of the city center, we have to do some kind of retrofitting of the spaces that we have in the city center. If you all aware that in our cities now, especially in KL, we got so many elevated highways, we have LRT lines, and underneath all these lines, there are spaces. At the moment, these are like we call lost spaces because nothing's been done on these spaces. And these spaces actually, and the spaces along the rivers, can actually be converted into green linkages, where people can even walk from their neighborhoods into the city center using all these transportation lines, the spaces underneath these elevated highways, these LRT lines and so forth. And I think what is needed now is to review back on the spaces, the location of all these spaces, and then how are they connected to each other, and how we can utilize them to become a very quick solution to provide access to these spaces, also to promote walking, and also to promote people to living in the city center without any gardens. They can have all these spaces as a place for their recreational needs. I have seen this being done in France last year when we were there. They converted all the railway line. The spaces underneath the railway lines some becomes like linear parks, and then some they have some kiosks and using it for economic activity. For small kiosks and for fruit sellers, grocers and groceries and so forth. So it is a very creative way of using what I call lost spaces that has been created as a result of meeting the needs for the transportation needs. Like I said before, we are very car-centric society. We give priority to provide transportation first, then only we think about the people. Whereas actually we are human beings, we are not cars, but we accommodate the needs of the cars first. I don't understand why.
It's about lifestyle, maintaining your life.
So okay. On the last note, apart from the walkable, we also must have create places for social interaction. I think I concur with Dr. Amer. I mean, because I'm also very concerned about the urban impact of environmental psychology on the urban design. Places for social interaction is very important. The feelings of isolation can create anxiety and the depression. Not meeting people, not having people to talk to. Sometimes you don't need to talk people. You just see people. It actually can go. So we need to provide these kind of spaces in the city center and in the neighborhoods. So we must use the streets not just as a road, to just to move, but also to become the setting for people to meet. Meeting people by chance. Sometimes you talking to a stranger sometimes can make you feel happy, getting to know new people and so forth. And this can be done in the city centers, in the streets of the city centers. So we have to review back now all the streets and convert the roads to become streets, and this can become another place for interaction. Finally, to make sure the environment that we provide is safe and legible. Safe in the sense that there is no perception of people people sometimes don't use the open spaces because feel they are not safe. So we have to make sure that there is constant surveillance of the spaces. People must be aware that there will people monitoring the space. Maintenance of spaces is very important. You know, if you have spaces, green spaces, but you don't maintain it, it will look like a rundown area, and people will be scared to use it. And in the end, people will not. So there is this symbiotic relationship between the maintenance of spaces and the perception of safety, and to have the cities to become legible in the sense that people can identify with, to create places where there is territorial definition in the way you design the houses, so people know that they are belonging to a certain community is very important, and this can be achieved through good urban design.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shuhana. Okay, this is a final call for the panelists. Perhaps I will actually give way to Dr. Amer and Dr. Idlan first, and perhaps Dr. Shuhana keep her last call towards the end. Okay, Dr. Amer, only 1 or 2 minutes, yeah? Your final call to people out there.
I think this is really an important time for us to discuss. We've heard from all the panelists that it's very obvious that if we were thinking that urban spaces and urban design was important, this COVID pandemic has definitely shown that it is very important. So I think if we are under the assumption, or at least with the idea that these kind of situations might repeat itself, then I think we all as a collective community need to be doing something about it, so that if we were to go into another MCO in the future, we won't have the same issues that we had in 2020. So I think it's really a call to all the relevant stakeholders, the Dewan Bandarayas, for example, the urban planners, the developers, to actually think about thinking along these lines, so that the new spaces that we create together will be more helpful in terms of maintaining health, which is, as I mentioned just now, mental health, physical health, and social well-being.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amer. Dr. Idlan, what is your final call?
Okay, so for me, first of all, for society, I think it's important that everybody, I'm going to make this a call, people to be sensible and to put self-imposed discipline when it comes to matters of COVID-19, because it's a community issue. I think as policymakers, we need to work together and get out of our silos and to come up with solutions that integrate different things. Today we see how urban design and mental health and economics are all intertwined together. So any kind of solutions that we want, we need to be able to take that forward. Last but not least, I think there is a saying that is never waste a good crisis. But we are going to waste this crisis if we do not take what we have learned from this experience and do something about it. It's not enough that we just say that we've learned this from this, but we need to couple that with action. Okay, from this. And I guess just to link to that is that from all this discussion about mental health issues that we've talked about and the resources that we've got, if you are suffering from or you're worried that you're suffering from mental health issues, then get help. A clinic that ada, but also not just to plug that, but if you're thinking you're suffering from this, don't suffer alone, and get help from the various resources that you can find and that we've mentioned. Thank you from me.
Thank you very much. We have received a lot of questions from our respective audience. But before we move on, Associate Professor Dr. Amer Siddiq and Dr. Idlan will leave us due to another obligation to meet. But Dr. Shuhana will stay with us. So on behalf of Malaysian Urban Design Association or Pertubuhan Reka Bentuk Bandar Malaysia, we would like to thank you. We would like to thank you so much to our honorable panelists, Associate Professor Dr. Amer Siddiq and Dr. Idlan, for sharing your thoughts and also spending your time with us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
All right, thank you.
Yes. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we shall continue with the question and answer, because we have received a very interesting question from the audience. Yeah. And okay, I will pick up question pertaining to the field of urban design so that Dr. Shuhana could answer. I will ask question related to panelist number 1 and panelist 2 will be answered by them later and posted in Parika Banda website. Yeah, all right. Dr. Shuhana, I will start with this very interesting question. All right, I will read it for you. Um, All right. I pick up this one because it is very important because you mentioned about this, and three of our panelists also mentioned about the community-based planning or community-based approach. All right. This question is about like what is the micro things of urban planning in our neighborhood?
Pardon?
Perhaps, Doctor,
Uh,
what is the micro things or the elements, I suppose, of urban planning or urban design could be because we're focusing on designing in our neighborhood. Perhaps that is something related to the one that you mentioned about creating a cluster,
yeah.
you know. So
Okay.
yeah, I
I think
suppose that
before
could
before
be.
I answer this question, I think this gives me an opportunity to clarify the difference between urban design and urban planning, because I
Please
think
do, Doctor.
uh, there's so much confusion and many things that it is interchangeable, that urban design is actually urban planning, and many also sees that urban design is a subset of urban planning. And there is also for people who are in the field who says that urban design is actually a field in itself. Yes, in the past, in the 70s, before the comprehensive development planning system was introduced, urban design has been a part of the town planning activity. It is because if you look at the history of the birth of modern town planning, it started before the birth of modern town planning. In the early 1900s, urban design is actually part of town planning, because at that time the architects were responsible to build the cities, and therefore designing the cities is based on certain artistic principles was actually the norm at that time. And because the land normally belongs to the king and also very few landowners, it is very easy to design cities based on certain kind of design principles and to control the quality of design. But after the Industrial Revolution, when the problem of urbanizations crop in, and then planning actually now deals with matters which is not just physical but socio-economic and political, then very slowly the concern for urban design is being eroded, because there are other things for the planners to worry about in actually building the cities. And therefore in the 80s, then we start to think about urban design as actually a field of specialization on its own, related to planning, that needs to be handled on its own, because of the concern for the three-dimensional quality of the cities instead of the two-dimensional qualities, which has been then the focus of town planning. What I meant by two-dimensional qualities, because the planning activities actually basically deal with policies, statements of objectives and how to solve problem in the form of a report, which they call the structure plan, local plan, and so forth. But no actually indication of how the design actually is going to be interpreted, and this caused the problem. When the policies are just in terms of written statement, the interpretation is only being given to the responsibility of the architects, who has the commission to design in specific sites within the city. But the problem is that the architects have the client needs to meet, and sometimes the
Yeah.
clients can dictate the kind of design that they want. And if the local authority doesn't have a very strong and stringent development control machinery and design control, then there is a missing link here. So the design of the site is actually meeting only the basic planning requirements in terms of density, plot ratio, and certain other regulations, but the design aspect is being left out. And that's why you
Okay.
can see that there is no coordination in the design. So what is meant by micro planning? Actually, what I haven't heard this term before. No? Huh?
The micro things of urban. I revert the question
Yeah.
towards our discussion. Micro things of urban design in our neighborhood.
Yeah, okay. Because
Because
urban
the
design,
question is about urban planning, but
okay, because the emphasis of urban design now is actually to translate these policies into actual design that can be translated on the ground in terms of physical quality. So anything which deals with the design of more than one building and spaces between these are actually within urban design concern. So that is why I said the role of urban design is not just in the city centre, but actually it can actually enter into the scope of a neighbourhood design or the residential scheme design, because neighbourhoods are actually concise comprises of many buildings, and you need to have a design to actually to coordinate the design so that they have a sense of a whole in terms of the way the environment you be provided. And that's why it's very important that the local authority has some kind of design statement that they wanted to achieve in any of the neighborhoods in the area. But what is more crucial is actually identity,
exactly.
the legibility, imageability, the having sense of landmarks, place markers to make people be able to recognize and find their way around in the neighborhood is very important, as well as in the city center. So the design of the as far as urban design is concerned, once you get out from the housing unit, you are already entering into the urban design problem. How do you reach from your house? How do you reach the nearest playground, for example, or the nearest open spaces, or how do you reach the neighborhood center from your housing unit? It's actually an urban design problem, but actually it's not really happening here in Malaysia. We are just putting as many housing units you can fill into the plot of land, because the developer wants to maximize on the profit that they want to get from each of the plot of land. And in the past, T-square planning has been a very common solution. What I call T-square planning is that it's just a straight rows of terrace housing, and to fit in as many housing units, and only the leftover spaces are given for open spaces or playground. So this kind of approach to designing neighborhood has to stop. We have to start to think of every neighborhood must have its own identity. It must have its own environment, quality environment in terms of walkability, safety, and you have to make sure that people are able to meet their neighbors and to be able to interact with their neighbors through the design of the layout. So this is I think, I don't know whether I'm answering the question, because I don't quite understand the question.
Yeah, I think that is actually about the micro things, Prof. Yes, if I could recap, is about the three-dimensional of
Yeah.
design of the space in between. Yeah, that is actually the most concern, whereby you sort of like starting to see the characteristic, the image and identity of a places, and also if you are talking about neighborhood in the housing or residential area, so those are the things that is actually very much needed, whereby, as you mentioned, make the places walkable. But then it depends again, how do you define neighborhood? Because at the commercial areas and businesses area in the urban center, you can also call it as a small neighborhood. It
Yeah.
depends on the area of coverage of how do you actually define them. And then in theoretical, is a neighborhood can be defined in a 400 meter radius, that can actually be said or can call as a neighborhood. All right.
The problem is different between the people living in a residential area as a neighborhood, as those who are living in the city center, because we also have neighborhood in the city center. People who are
Exactly,
living and they have a different problem, and the approach to urban design should be different for them.
Yeah. it is very contextualized,
Yeah.
when you explain about it.
Mm.
All right. It seems to have we have picked up about like four questions. Another question is actually related to neighborhood residential that we have already answered just now, and then the question is the impact of urban design, how to have a good walk to the office in the morning without perspiring and have to start work in a soaking shirt. So that is actually about in a city center, walking in the city center to go to work. Yeah, Dr. Sana, maybe just a quick one
I,
before we
I
go to another one last question.
I think that is about climatic design actually. When we talk about walkable environment, one of the things that people find difficult to walk or even cycle is because of the climate. I mean, we are not just hot climate. We is also very humid. And then sweating is actually one thing that occurs a lot as compared to those in the Mediterranean. But I think but this shouldn't deter us from having cities that are walkable, because in the end, we'll be stuck up this problem that we have in pandemic. We also stuck with having problem where people become obese, not enough not having enough regular exercise because our lifestyle is so dependent on transportation to move around. One solution that can be done is actually to design pedestrian linkages that is comfortable and sheltered from the elements. I mean, if you look at the city centre in the past, when we have the shop houses and the 5-foot walkway kaki lima, they are actually the one very very sustainable and climatically responsive solution to the problem in providing linkages within the comfort of the building, but actually exposed to it's very unique because it's part of building and yet it is actually a public thoroughfare. And if you try to walk in the 5-foot walkway of in the old shop houses, you don't sweat actually, because it's very the space is very very enclosed. And if we actually accommodate this, if we enforce some policies whereby in the city center, all the buildings that hasn't got this kind of 5-foot walkways or sidewalk to have an what do you call it, like canopy like. I remember discussing with the planners in Baltimore City Council. They were actually enforcing that all this building has some kind of canopies, to shelter people when they walk in front of the shop houses. The people will not be wet in the rain, and then they will feel the hot spell. So this can be done by retrofitting some of the buildings that hasn't a 5-foot walkway to enforce so that in order to make people walk, the linkages is very important. Continuity of the pedestrian linkages is very important, and the comfort you provide. Comfort in the sense that you are sheltered from the elements, and then there is no changes of levels, which is very difficult to negotiate for the disabled and so forth. That's why I said that's why we have to focus on urban design, because this thing can be resolved through good urban design. Because at planning level, all they can do is just to specify the location of these pedestrian linkages, but who is going to design it? The design is actually going to show whether it works or not. I mean, this problem of people arriving at the office being soaking wet with sweat. But another part where the employer can provide is to have showers. I mean, in Japan, they have a place for their employees to have showers once they arrive to the office, because they'll be carrying their spare shirts, or they have some system of lockers to put their clean shirts and so forth. So this is another way on the part of the employer and so forth. But actually, the design of the linkages can actually help to minimize this problem.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sohana. You some sort like summarize what have been written in my PhD research, which is my PhD is about enhancing pedestrian environment for the employee to work in the city center. So inshallah, I will upload the full thesis into our website very soon, yeah, to Perika Bandar website very soon. Okay, we have got last question. However, that is actually already embedded within the discussion, but just to to satisfy our excited audience, how urban design, Dr. Shana, how urban design can reduce mental health issue and insecurity. I suppose that we
Yeah,
have covered
that's
on the
why I
mental
say
health
about
part.
safety
On
just
the
now. Yeah.
insecurity parts,
Mm.
can you please elaborate a little bit in 2 minutes on the insecurity part, how urban design can
I don't
help?
under I because I think that's why I say because I have that's why I started the discussion by emphasizing the relationship between environmental psychology and urban design, and how important urban design is, because the role of urban design is actually to solve this problem of the psychological impact of people as a result of their environment. That's why have feeling secure in environment actually relate to that perception of safety. Sometimes you think, even though you have provide a house like a prison where it's really there's a fortress around the house, you can still feel insecure if you perceive that you are not safe. So the because we're dealing with psychology, the way people look at the environment. That's why it's very important that when you design the neighborhood, you have to make sure that people perceive your neighborhood to be safe. Even though you may put because I have done a research on gated garden, where we interviewed people living in gated garden. They spend so much money living in gated garden, and yet they still feel insecure, they still feel they are unsafe. So what's the point of living in a gated garden? So having a guard does not mean that you feel safe, or having a gate. So actually the design of the whole environment is very important, and that's why this thing cannot be resolved just by making your own unit safe. At the moment, this is what's happening. I noticed in Malaysia, everybody will try to make their house very safe from intruders, but the neighborhood itself is not safe. So, and to make the neighborhood safe, it has to start from the way you design the whole layout of the housing environment. And then you actually the concept of defensible space is very important, and I think very seldom we take into consideration. Well, although it's a very old theory by Oscar Newman, but this theory is very still important. The need to have surveillance, the need to have spaces where we can watch over your neighbors is very taken lightly. It's not being given really. I think we need to, because the developers can still get away with providing residential scheme that is just providing just gates and having a guard. It's become very trendy to have gated guarded environment, whereas I think the negative outcome of it, you're creating an elite ghettos. Your all the rich people becomes like a ghettos. They fence themselves out from the other environment to make them safe, whereas if only their house are safe, but the outside their housing scheme is not safe, they will not be safe overall. So I think you cannot be very selfish when it comes to safety and security. You cannot be selfish, you cannot be safe on your own. It has to be the whole
Yes, very
environment.
true.
So
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
it's
very
going to
true.
be a long discussion if I were to really elaborate on this.
Perhaps we could cover
I
about all this kind of micro
mm,
concept, which is yeah, very interesting to talk about. I think that Sana, based on what you have mentioned, I think it's about time for us to branding the city to be in
mm,
line with the new norm, right?
yeah.
And then I suppose that we need more people like you to talk about urban design and passionate about urban design, and really taking care of the space in between building. All right. We have, ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at the end of the session. As a conclusion, the calls from all the panelists are very strong and convincing for us to reflect, to digest, and to react in order to make ourselves, our family, society, and institution be more resilient, sustain, and be more prepared if there is if there is if the pandemic wave strike again, Prof. So this this morning is all the panelists have actually giving a brilliant solution, a strategy, and also uh, get into give us a deeper understanding how does the mental health and well-being does really have a very close relationship to the way we design our built environment. All right. For today's event, all participants will get a certificate of attendance from the organizer. Please fill up the Google form from the link in Pereka Banda Facebook so that we could send directly to your email. Our next Pereka Banda Urban Talk webinar will be held somewhere in the early of December this year. The topic will be surrounding urban design in Malaysia, the road to success, right? And we hope to have you again. And please check on our official website for more information. Um, on behalf of Malaysian Urban Design Association or Pertubuhan Reka Bentuk Bandar Malaysia, we would like to thank you so much to our third panelist, Dr. Shuhana Shamsuddin, Adjunct Professor, UTM, and all the participants for joining us in this event. Thank you again and have a good weekend to all.
Thank you.